Good evening and welcome everyone. I'm Julia Gray. I'm the Executive Director here at the Wilson Museum, for those of you who might not know me. And our mission here at the Wilson Museum is to cultivate and encourage human connection across place, time, and cultures. We'd like to welcome you all to this evening's program here at the museum. We are in the homeland of the Penobscot Nation and their Wabanaki relations. Today's program is part of our Connecting to Collections program series, which is made possible through the generous support of Bangor Savings Bank. And if you're not already a member of the Wilson Museum, we encourage you. We've got information about membership, donations, and to sign up for our e-newsletter at the back of the room. We also get wonderful comments about this space, and this space is available for your next event, party, wedding, whatever that may happen to be. Just ask us and we can give you more information. I'm really excited to welcome our esteemed panelists to this program this afternoon. We've been talking about this work. We've had a couple of programs starting to talk about climate change and sustainability, and this is the next step in that process, and we're excited to be a convening place for this conversation. We have our panelists this evening are Johanna Blackman from A Climate to Thrive, Roberta Boskowitz from the Castine's Town Select Board and Comprehensive Plan Committee, and Alan Kratz from Blue Hill Peninsula Tomorrow. During the first half of 2022, or 2023, excuse me, the Wilson Museum developed a new mission statement and core language, including guiding principles and social responsibility statement. And two pieces of that inspire this program tonight. From our guiding principles and goals, we are a community gathering place. We are cultivating a strong sense of place throughout our campus where people can learn, play, connect, and participate in community-wide conversations. And from our social responsibility statement, we see the effects of climate change in our local community and around the world. And we are committed to becoming a sustainable organization that is part of the solution. So those two parts of our evolving mission really drive this program and this work. I'm going to introduce our panelists, then they're going to give us a little bit of short presentation about the work that they do with their organizations, and then we're going to do questions from me, the moderator, and questions from you, the audience, as we move through the evening. Johanna Blackman is the Executive Director of A Climate to Thrive and a founding member of the organization. She brings over a decade of experience in nonprofit management, over 12 years of experience in climate action, and a background in education, youth mentorship, and counseling psychology. Johanna's particular passion is helping anyone and everyone discover their unique contribution to climate solutions and building community-driven climate action through Maine and beyond. She's an avid writer, explorer, and a mother. Roberta Boskowitz from the Castine Select Board and Comprehensive Plan Committee grew up learning about water conservation in New Mexico. Her zooarchaeological studies, which if you don't know is studying animal bones in archaeological contexts, helped her develop an interest in how climatological changes affect human populations and how human behavior affects other species and our planet. Roberta joined the Wisconsin Conservation Voters just after the Great Lakes Compact was created, and as a board member helped to lead several conservation and climate change initiatives. She's currently a member of Blue Hill Peninsula Tomorrow and is preparing to lead the Comprehensive Plan Implementation Committee on Climate Change and Natural Resources. And our third panelist, Alan Kratz, is from Blue Hill Peninsula Tomorrow. Alan is the principal of Resilience Works, LLC, a firm that focuses on helping communities secure funding for climate resilience projects. As a service provider for the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future, he helped Blue Hill, Brookland, Brooksville, Penobscot, and Sedgwick enroll in the Community Resilience Partnership so that they can implement strategies of Maine Won't Wait, a 4-year plan for climate action in Maine. He is co-coordinator of Blue Hill Peninsula Tomorrow, a monthly forum for elected and appointed officials to discuss intermunicipal climate resilience strategies. He has a lot of big words. He also served on the Comprehensive Plan Committee for Brooksville and is a member of Brooksville's Sea Level Rise and Climate Change Committee. All right, I'm going to hand it first to Johanna.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for having me here tonight, Julia, and everybody. Welcoming me into your community to share a bit about my experience with A Climate to Thrive, which is a nonprofit organization based on Mount Desert Island. Started off working primarily on MDI and now supporting communities throughout the state of Maine. And so to share a little bit of background for folks not familiar with A Climate to Thrive's work, we got started in late 2015 when a group of MDI residents, including myself and my husband and many, many, many others, found ourselves having an increasing number of conversations about our concerns about climate change in different public spaces like the library or the grocery store or after yoga class or at the post office. And we decided, well, let's do something about this in our community. And so we started gathering over potluck dinners and having conversations about what we could do on MDI and what action might look like, and then formed different task forces and launched in January 2016. We had over 200 people come to our launch event, which is really big for MDI in the winter, especially because it was the same day as the big Patriots game. So we were really proud about that. And we got to work and have grown from this little grassroots initiative that came out of citizens' desire to this formal nonprofit, which now has 8 full-time staff. Just as of 2 weeks ago, we brought on our 8th team member. And as I said, works on MDI and statewide. And the really key thing that we focus our work around is a community-driven approach to climate solutions. And so we're 8 years into that and have really seen the benefit of taking this approach to addressing climate change. And a lot of our work lands on the mitigation side of climate work. So we're reducing emissions associated with our island as quickly as possible. But we are also more and more looking at the resilience and adaptation side of the equation as well. And these two have a lot of intersection, as we'll talk about in a moment. But what we've seen is that this community-driven approach is really important. And of course, we need international policy, we need national policy, we need state policy like Maine Won't Wait. But when communities have an opportunity to really take the reins and take leadership on what climate solutions and adaptation are going to look like, then this is all kind of obvious, but I think it bears stating that you're going to get solutions that are going to better meet the priorities of the community in which they're designed. Not only that, you're going to have the opportunity to multi-solve. So climate touches pretty much every aspect of a community's functioning and life. And so when you're really having these kind of more detailed, nuanced conversations at the local level, you get to say, okay, well, how does climate intersect with housing? How does it intersect with food security? And to really think about how you can solve several different challenges or take advantage of different opportunities at once. And a really important piece is that as you have these conversations and get to pull from the strengths of various community members, like their pre-existing knowledge and life experience, then you're creating better community capacity to take advantage of things like federal and state funding and to move forward solutions that meet local priorities, as opposed to not having that capacity. So we found this to be just such a powerful approach. I know that when Julia was reaching out about this panel, she was talking about a few different areas of topics of conversation. So energy, resilience, and education. And I was really excited about that because those are 3 areas that we really focus on in a Climate to Thrive. And a lot of our work is on really innovative energy solutions that simultaneously reduce emissions while also increasing local equity, energy literacy, and empowerment. And we really have seen over these 8 years of working on various different types of energy solutions that within this transition off of fossil fuel driven energy sources to clean energy or renewable energy, there's an incredible opportunity for local communities to increase all of those things I just mentioned. So there's a really incredible opportunity to increase equity by owning our own generation of clean energy. We can build a lot of equity in our community. When a town owns solar production, when a school owns solar production, when an organization or a business or a home is able to own their own energy generation, there's an incredible amount of equity that they generate through doing so. They also get to be part of deciding how that energy is going to be sited. They increase their knowledge of energy so they can take their energy situation more into their own hands and into their own control, which is really, really exciting. Also, there's an incredible opportunity to increase resilience and reliability. So we all know that as we get more severe weather associated with climate, our energy situation is more vulnerable. But when we build out these distributed sources of generation, especially if they are paired with storage, and as they increase our local distribution network in our electrical grid, we increase our energy resilience and reliability. We're no longer reliable on energy being generated really far away and traveling across large transmission lines. We have a network that we're building in our community that's more stable and builds our resilience. And then, of course, we can build our local energy literacy and empowerment and leadership in the process. So I want to give just a couple of really brief examples of the work that we've done. A lot of solar work, and so all different types of solar projects, from municipal solar for all 4 island towns, projects ongoing, to solar on the MDI high school roof, nonprofits and businesses. But what we've found to be a really important thing here is that ownership matters. And so, as I mentioned, in owning solar generation, there's an incredible opportunity to build equity and to reduce the cost of your electrical bill at least 50%, if not more. And we know that those electrical bills are climbing. And what we saw is that a lot of our lower income community members couldn't afford that upfront cost of solar. So one of the projects that I'm most excited about right now is we've been working on a cooperative ownership model for solar that that eliminates the upfront cost and allows low income folks and renters to own their own solar. So it's really, really exciting work that's happening right now in that field. But as we've done the solar work, we've also moved more and more beyond just generation into the importance of our grid, and are now working on projects that involve storage, resilience centers for our different towns that have generation, renewable energy generation paired with storage, smart grid technology, so managing, balancing out the generation with the demand, the time of use. This is the grid of our future. And so it's an exciting opportunity to really be part of leading how that's going to look in our local communities, as opposed to kind of having it slapped upon us. Building out plans for microgrids and resilience hubs, as I just mentioned. Another key aspect of energy that we work within, of course, is how our buildings are functioning. And so, as we look to shifting to clean energy, we also need to be looking to reducing how much energy we're using. And so the efficiency of buildings and how we are heating and cooling them has become really critically important. So we've done a lot of work with trying to help different entities, again, from towns to businesses to homeowners, understand how to take this comprehensive approach to weatherizing your building, changing over your heating source, thinking about this whole package, and then the incredible incentives that are out there to do all of that right now. And how it benefits homeowners. So then there's this piece about resilience. And so, as I mentioned, this is something we're thinking more and more about. And what we're finding is that there's this incredible overlap between the actions that we need to take to reduce emissions and the actions that we want to take to increase resilience. That there's a lot of commonality between those. And so, I mentioned that as I talked about building out local distribution and storage that helps also build out the strength of your local electrical distribution network. And that's one example of that overlap of energy resilience and mitigation going hand in hand. But we found it especially important when it comes to resilience to really have a community-driven process, because the community is going to know best about, how they feel vulnerable, what needs to be preserved, how we can make that plan happen. So we've done climate action planning or community resilience plans with various towns on MDI through these highly participatory, that's a terrible word, approach. And it's interesting because one of the things that's really arisen out of that is this difference between planning and action. I know you've been going through comprehensive planning, and we can plan and we can plan and we can plan, but there's also this need to be acting now. And so we've been in this interesting place where, we're doing a community-driven community resilience planning process with the town of Tremont and doing a lot of gathering of community feedback. And now we're in the drafting phase, but we heard really early on that the community was very concerned about having a resilience center for prolonged outages, a place where people could go and charge devices. They could have it as a heating or cooling center, a place where people could charge medical devices. And so we knew that there was a federal grant opportunity available that could fund that work. And so we worked with the town and didn't need to wait for the plan, to be fully developed, that the town got approval to go for this funding right away. And so I think that's something I've seen really important, is that we can get really married to the perfect plan, or the need for the perfect plan, but there are incredible opportunities to be acting now. And I think that action sometimes is the most important thing. And then just finally wanted to say a little bit about the importance of education. And we, front-loaded a lot of educational work when we were getting started, and have really continued to have that as a strong theme throughout, because we've seen that that is the way to facilitate the community-driven process, is to provide ourselves with information. Those of us that got started didn't know an incredible amount when we got started. So finding that education for ourselves, but then also bringing those educational tools to our community and learning together has absolutely increased our local capacity and engagement, empowerment. And I want to just call out in particular both our internship work that we've done, working with young people who have really been the leaders of this in our community. And whenever we have interns out of Climate to Thrive, they really lead the way. And it's our favorite time of year, and they shine light on things that we weren't previously seeing. And secondly, also a program that one of our staff members developed called the Climate Ambassadors Program, seeing this need to provide people with tools, not only to identify how they can be part of change in their community from their unique skill sets, but also how to talk about climate change more, how to talk about what's possible or what we're concerned about, because there's a lot of perceptions about this being a more challenging topic to talk about, and there are some kind of proven from a social science standpoint ways to talk about it that are more effective. And so she developed this program that we've been doing on MDI and also offering statewide that's been really successful when it comes to addressing some of those topics. And I will end with that for now.
Great. Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to turn things a little bit forecasting. And so my work on the comprehensive plan committee. So on the comprehensive plan, we've been focusing on some of the major issues that we're dealing with, so that after the plan is passed, we will have our implementation committee. And so this is going to be a shameless ask, but anybody here who might be interested on being on the implementation committee for climate change, please let me know. But so as we went through, we had never written a climate change chapter in our comprehensive plan. None had ever been asked for before. So this was our first one. So we focused on some major things. So we focused on storms and flooding, and you can see in the one picture on the left, that was our town dock on December 23rd last year. Julia had another picture from another direction that was fabulous, or not. And so the map next to it is a map that shows what storms and flooding impacts are going to have going forward. And so, since 1961, Hancock County had seen a 30% increase in 100-year precipitation events. And we are the highest county in coastal Maine for that increase. And anyone who was here knows that we recently had a huge precipitation event from that last tropical depression that came through. And we saw flooding in ways that we haven't even seen flooding before. There were houses on Perkins Street that were flooded, their basements flooded, that they had never flooded before. So that's something new that we have to look at. But this map just shows that our major places that are at risk are, of course, the British Canal, Wadsworth Cove Road, if you can see them in the green there, in the green there. And then, yep, thank you. And down at, now I'm lost. Okay. And then, yeah, back around there. And then up at Morse Cove, where 166 goes down, yep, up there. And then in the red or the kind of pink is Dunn's Meadow, which is another place that is really affected by flooding. So these are things that we can work with the DOT on some of these places, but I'll get to that in a minute. So that's just storms and flooding. And then we also face sea level rise. Now, the great thing about Castine is that our topography is good, and we aren't going to have so much trouble in, all of us, like our houses, but we're planning for about a 3 to 4 foot rise by 2050, which means our entire town dock will need to be revised. Again, Wadsworth Cove Road will need to have some stuff done to it. And so sea level rise at 8 feet, which was predicted for 2100, would pretty much take out, because it would be every day, it wouldn't be just an event, it would pretty much take out our entire town dock. So we have to start thinking, what are we going to do for 2050 and make those plans? But then we have to immediately start thinking, and what are we going to do going on? Although there has been some good news coming out about the temperature rises, but we'll see how that plays out with sea level rise. And then that leads to, we have transportation concerns. So that the climate committee will have to be working with the DOT on how are we going to address the road at Morse Cove? How are we going to address the British Canal? And then, unfortunately, Wadsworth Cove Road is not a state road. So Castine will have to decide, what are we going to do at Wadsworth Cove? Are we going to, build the road up and try to, and then how do we protect the swimming area as well, right? So do we build the road up to try to protect the swimming area? And these are decisions that all of us have to be involved in, and all of us have to work with. So one of the things that we have done is we got to work with the Community Resilience Partnership, and that was thanks a lot to Peninsula Tomorrow, who told us about it. And some of you were at the original meeting for that. And so we can talk about that later, but that's through the Governor's Office of Future and Innovation. And those are the strategies that they're embracing for the future with climate change. And I won't say anything more about that right now. So I'm just going to turn it over to Alan.
Thank you, Roberta. Thank you, Julia. And it's great to be on the panel with both of you, Johanna and Roberta. I come from Brooksville, and if I had a motorboat, I could have been here in 20 minutes. But it took like an hour and went through some of the roads that Roberta's just illustrated. And luckily, we didn't have flood conditions tonight, but that certainly is a concern. I don't have any photos or illustrations, an illustration, a picture's worth 1,000 words. I'm going to reverse the equation tonight and just have 1,000 words equal. And I promise they're not going to be any big words, I've been told. You can show a vote at the end of the evening and see whether it's been big words or little words. So, Julie gave us, which is the button here. It's that one. Every clicker is different. No.
So we're gonna.
I'll let you do that.
Sure. So I'm going to talk really briefly about kind of the initial steps that we're working on here at the museum as part of our climate change and resilience work. We're just getting started, but I'm inspired by the work that's happening in our communities, and also the museum field is talking a lot and thinking a lot about how we become sustainable organizations, because there are some specific reasons why museums have not necessarily been. We also are stewards of a historic house, two historic buildings that are coping with climate change in a very vulnerable environment. So there are some things that are specific to us as a museum, history organization, and so on that we're tackling. And there are also opportunities that come with being an educational institution that we're excited about. And then after I do this, we'll take you through some questions, and Alan kindly created slides that will help guide us through that. So that's very helpful. In talking about energy use, we have started with baby steps, but we're working in the right direction. We are almost done converting our exhibit lighting from fluorescent to LED lights, which is much more energy efficient and looks a whole lot better, and also allows us to not have to change the light bulbs so often, which are inside of our display cases, and a real challenge that way. It also significantly reduces the heat that's being generated by our lighting system, because we had fluorescent ballasts that were generating quite a lot of heat. We have programmable thermostats in a number of our spaces, and are continuing to put those into place where we actually have heat, which is not all of our buildings. We've started setting our temperature set points in our spaces that are not occupied regularly down just a few degrees and seeing what the impact that makes on our energy consumption. We have central heat pumps in this space and in the basement of the Perkins house, and reducing the set point in the cool weather and then increasing the set point in hot weather is I think reducing our energy consumption. It's really hard to tell if you don't deeply analyze it because the price is going through the roof. So I think we're using less energy even though we're paying more. And we recently worked with College of the Atlantic to do an energy audit of the Dudier house, which is where our office space is. And we're starting to work on implementation for recommendations from that. We still need to do energy audits of all of our other buildings, but we're working in that direction. When it comes to resilience, this is a very real thing for us because we sit right on the water. During that storm that you saw the images of the town dock being flooded, we had two major washouts on our shore. A big portion of our shore has really big riprap boulders, but a portion of our shore that is somewhat smaller boulders, but still boulders, had two substantial washouts. And we are seeing the impact of increased rainfall. The runoff, the stormwater runoff in Cassine is a huge issue, and we're having real challenges with that. And we're seeing the impact of the increased moisture, wind, and salinity on our shoreside buildings, probably on these as well. So early on, we made the decision. There had been a plan to expand the museum building to provide for more fluxion storage, and we decided to not expand our footprint on the shore side of the property. As part of that resilience of not wanting to build any more in that vulnerable environment. We're working to maintain current meadow and wooded spaces on the campus and to find new ways to reduce our lawn space. We have a lot of lawn, which we mow all the time and is not, it's better than our gravel and our pavement, but we'd like to have more things like gardens and meadows and that sort of thing. All of our future infrastructure decisions will be guided by our sustainability and resilience goals. So those will be key factors in making decisions about how we do any future infrastructure work, including new construction. And the historic preservation work that needs to happen on both the Perkins house and the museum building are also being guided by not just current climate impacts, but what we expect future climate impacts to be to those buildings. And there's some really good work in the historic preservation field about how you need to do that work, looking back and looking forward. And then as an educational institution, we have the opportunity to connect with people and provide learning opportunities. So currently we're doing it programmatically at programs like this, like programs we had about climate change in the Gulf of Maine and with folks from the University of Maine, Climate Change Institute, and so on. In the future, we're looking at developing both exhibits and K-12 programs to share information and learning around climate change, sustainability, and resilience, and also sharing our own work. So interpreting the work that we're doing as an organization. How do we share our internal work? Because we have, unlike some community entities, we have people coming in regularly, so we can say, hey, look what we did. Consider how that might be useful in your life and your work. And then because we hold cultural heritage from around the world, and often, and in many cases from communities, culturally connected communities who are much more heavily impacted by climate change than we are, we're looking to how we can do storytelling with those communities to talk about what the impact that climate change is having on them and their cultures and their history and so on. So that's the four of us and kind of an introduction to what we're doing. And then I want to move on to ask some questions and having our panelists think about some questions, and we'll certainly work with the audience as well to do that. So, and I did give our panelists these questions in advance, so they had a chance to come up with answers. I'm not putting them on the spot, and we'll move through folks however works out to make the most sense. But one of the first question was, why is it especially important for communities on the coast of Eastern Maine to do this work?
So I've done a lot of work in community resilience, and one of my specialties is helping communities find funding. And both Johanna and Roberta have talked about this, and there are a number of opportunities we have. The risk really is real, as we've heard this evening. Roberta's pointed it out, so has Johanna. And we're very fortunate the American Rescue Plan Act is actually underspent. There's a lot of money still to be obligated and then spent by the end of 2026. The bipartisan infrastructure law has provided a lot of funding for NOAA, with EPA, other federal programs for which our communities can receive funding through competitive processes. The Inflation Reduction Act similarly. And then statewide, we have the main Community Resilience Partnership. Roberta has just talked about that. And we have the main Infrastructure Adaptation Fund, provides funding for culvert repairs and stream crossing upgrades. So that's a very exciting new opportunity. Second question, That-
let's go this question to each of our panelists.
Fine.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Okay, so for the first question, I think for me, it's because a part of it is that hasn't been mentioned yet, is that as climate change continues, Maine is going to be one of the states that's most impacted by climate migration. And we are expecting lots and lots of new people to come. And so it's important that we start and we do mitigation and we work on resilience, but we also need to plan for the future of how are we going to bring those people in and how are we going to make that work? That's
A really important and good point. I would just add in regards to this question, why it's important for our community to do this work. We're incredibly vulnerable here, but also flipping back again to that it's an opportunity. And, you know, this process and this type of work is going to happen. And we can either be kind of leaders within it and really talk about it on this localized level and look at what those opportunities are for our communities, or we can kind of just wait for it to happen in a way that will be much more, we'll miss out on a lot of the opportunity to really be part of this process in a localized way that matches our needs. So I think that for me is the top reason.
We actually do have some good examples here. Johanna and Roberta talked about how, you know, these things can really start at a very local level, intermunicipal, I use that word, but it really is very important for us to work as towns together because of strength in numbers and competing for national funding. And one of the things that we did in Blue Hill, on the Blue Hill Peninsula, was start small. We started with Brooksville and Blue Hill. We were both working on comprehensive plans somewhat simultaneously. We realized that there were greater efforts in other towns and that we could simply add into the existing cooperation on trash transfer, on fire protection, on schooling, on broadband, add climate into that, work together effectively.
I learned so much from Alan at Peninsula Tomorrow, and he's so great at bringing communities together. I think one of the things that really led me to start to be interested in this work here was as I noticed that we were in higher temperatures in the summer as I was actually melting in my house with my dog a couple summers ago. And I noticed, you know, that in the winter when we have extreme cold events as well, we need to really look out for our community members. And we have some community members that don't have generators. They don't have access to places that are cooler in the summer. And so for me, it was just a really community-based thing that I wanted to make sure that we do the work to make sure that everyone in our community has access to be safe.
Looking at the second question first, how are these efforts different depending on the scale at which they're happening? I'll just go back to the example of, you know, the town of Tremont making decisions around a resilience hub, renewably powered battery storage, smart grid technology. So that community needs to make the decision about where to site that. Where does it need to be sited in the community, and what are the local impacts going to be? How do we support it? How do we make sure folks use it? Those decisions have to happen at the local level. But then, you know, through programs like Allen's or Climate to Thrive has a program called Local Leads the Way that supports community-driven initiatives throughout the state. We can share that model regionally. We need our state to be prioritizing the type of legislation and passing through the funding that makes that possible. And we need the federal government, of course, to be doing the same at a larger scale. And globally, so much is needed very, very quickly. I got involved. I was not, you know, like our high school intern, someone that grew up learning about climate change, you know, in upper elementary school or high school, but I did start learning about it when I was in graduate school. And I'm not like my kids who hear about it, you know, they're 4 and 7. But I did start hearing about it pretty young, and then I was pregnant with my first child at the same time that we founded a Climate to Thrive, and so that's that's what got me involved.
So here's one word: volunteers are really essential. I keep finding there's so many people in our communities. I've seen this in all of our communities, how people are just ready to volunteer for a good cause. By show of hands, how many people are on a committee here in Eston? Okay, how many people are on 2 committees? Okay, and 3 committees? Yeah, that's typical all across Blue Hill. There, and that's what makes our communities thrive.
Absolutely. That is what makes our community thrive. And I think one interesting thing, one of the questions was, did we have any surprising partnerships? And when we had our original community resilience meeting, we had somebody step up that had just moved to Castine, and he said, oh, by the way, I used to own a company and I did energy audits. So would you like me to do that for you? And it was like, yes, please. So that was very surprising and a wonderful thing. But really, again, I'll say, just working with Peninsula tomorrow and working with all the people across the peninsula and learning that really we have more in common than we have different. So it's important.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. That's the direction in which you both took your answers, and I would agree completely and just say that, like, we've had so many examples like that where, you know, someone came to one of our early meetings and said, I'm a former energy regulator. Can I be helpful? Yes, is the answer to that question. But it's not even, you know, the folks with those obvious intersection points with climate work. And that's why I love the process of sitting down with somebody and saying, well, what do you do? What do you care about? What has your life held? What do you know from your life? Because we all have something really critical to offer to the puzzle that is solutions. And each of those pieces are greatly needed. I will also say, as far as partnerships go, at Climate to Thrive, we've certainly learned that our utility companies make or break this transition. At the moment, that partnership has not been great, but that is a partnership that absolutely has to be there.
So here's a nice success story, and Roberta actually was part of this here on an extended basis here in Castine. 3 towns have money from the Community Resilience Partnership funded by the state to do a 3-town climate vulnerability assessment. When we put out the request for proposals and interviewed what turned out to be a successful firm, they provided an alternative, an add-on for an additional cost to do a coastal flood community science. And the evaluation committee, the town representatives who were deciding whether to find the extra money, decided this was not something that could be added in, so it dropped. But the town of Brooksville stepped up and said, well, we have a $25,000 capital reserve for climate resilience. We'll put forth $10,000 to make this happen. So that's how we extended this 3-town climate vulnerability assessment to take on the additional benefit of community science. Fast forward, the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, by the way, is the firm that will be doing that under competitive selection. We've now come, and Roberta was part of this, we've put in an application to the Onion Foundation to extend that to 6 other towns on the Blue Hill Peninsula. Fingers crossed, we're hoping we get the money from the Onion Foundation to do that, and that'll be very exciting. That's a success story because it shows how people are willing to stretch and spend taxpayer dollars for an important cause.
Thank you. So here in Castine, our biggest success thus far was that we applied and we received our first community resilience grant. And we got $50,000 with which we added more insulation to Emerson Hall. We changed out all the lights in Emerson, the Adams School, and the library to LED. We found out that those really pretty red exit signs actually use up a great deal of energy, and so we replaced all of those. And then we had some money left over, so we got new heat pumps for Emerson Hall, which is going to help with our heating bill quite a bit this winter. I can't wait to see the dinner. Now, of course, the prices are going up, but we'll look at the whatever kilowatt hours or whatever and see how we do.
I think I would go back to the cooperative solar model that we're building. So we ran a couple of different solarize programs over the past 8 years, which have a kind of bulk purchase deal for homeowner rooftop solar. And those were very successful. Between those and other larger projects, we've increased solar production on MDI probably now like 11 or 12 times over where it was when we started. But it was absolutely true that low-income folks, and of course renters, didn't have access to solar ownership. And then there's people for whom it isn't, you can't put solar on their home. And we wanted to solve that. And, you know, as I'm sure many of you know from opening your mailbox, you get a lot of info about solar subscriptions, which are different than solar ownership. You get maybe 12, maybe 15% off your monthly bill. It also is most often the case that the renewable energy credits, which is how you actually count the emission reduction, are being sold to somebody else. So you're not actually getting clean energy. And so, but in particular, like that equity piece of like the benefit, the financial benefit of owning solar. And so we partnered with entities in Massachusetts to develop a cooperative ownership model that would fit within Maine's regulatory framework, because we have a different regulatory framework here. And it's been so successful that MDI Co-op, which is led by a steering committee of volunteers, so they've all like, their energy literacy has gone through the roof as a committee, and they're exploring their first sites. And then it's been such a great experience that we partnered with all 5 tribal communities in Maine on a submission for a prize through the Department of Energy, which we got. And so now are supporting the 5 tribal communities in developing their own intertribal solar cooperative.
So how can we, what are some of the ways we can better inform our communities? I think it's what we've been talking about tonight. It's having meetings, it's sharing information, it's providing good examples of what's worked. And just the communication that you've heard Johanna and Roberta talk about, I think is really the key to success.
I think just sitting here tonight and listening to Johanna, which first of all, if you listen to Johanna, you know what, I'm usually sitting up there. She's incredible. But I think that education component is so very important, and to be able to bring that is really going to be important.
There's an incredible resource out there. Her name is Catherine Hayhoe, and folks might have heard about her, but she works specifically around effective climate communication. And also the Yale Center for Climate Communication is another incredible resource. And they've done studies that show that our perception that climate is a tricky topic. I love that you couldn't even post about this on Facebook. Because
Facebook wouldn't let me boost the post about this program because I had to do all kinds of things. I had to do a disclaimer and do it from my desktop computer because it was a political issue.
What would be funding for?
Climate change.
But our perception that this is like potentially inflammatory actually doesn't match how many folks want to be talking about this. So there's this, like, I think it's called like the loop of silence that's happening out there, where we're not talking about it because we think people don't want to talk about it. And then we're reinforcing the perception that people don't want to talk about it because we're not talking about it. But a lot of us are concerned about it. And particularly what Catherine Hayhoe talks about is when you lead not with the science, we hear the science, we know this is serious. But when you lead with what do you care about, and connect with people who care about something, and you can bring out what they care about, and then connect it back with both the changes that are going to happen, but also the solutions that are possible, that's the most effective way to be talking about this. And then the final piece I'd say here is that letting young people lead is a great way to better inform our communities about climate change and possibility.
So Johanna, your comment reminds me how important the framing is and the messaging. When we started work for Brooksville's comprehensive plan, we wanted to address climate change, but we didn't call it that. We simply asked people to give examples of how they've noticed changes in water temperature or different species of animals, growing seasons. We got more information than we ever anticipated. It was it was wonderfully useful for creating the climate change chapter there. And we didn't use the word climate change. So, yeah,
So
please.
that inspired me. So it was really interesting. When we were doing our visioning work with our board and our staff, we, as a staff and the facilitator working with, we had in there language about resilience and sustainability, but we weren't using the word climate change. And then when we were talking about that with our board and our staff on our visioning sessions, one of our trustees was like, well, why aren't we just saying climate change? We're like, well, because you're trustees, and trustees don't use scary words like climate change. So that was a really wonderful thing for us to have people on our board of trustees like, no, we can actually use those words. We can talk about those words.
So I think joining local organizations is one of the things. I think everybody has an entry point into this whole discussion. It may be something of avocational interest to you or vocational interest. Talking with people. I think that's just the best way to do this.
I would agree. And so all of you need to sign up for the implementation committee. Even those of you that are already on 3 committees, that's my clipboard. I'm going to take no. No, I think, I think that's a great way to get involved. But there will be many other projects that we'll be doing that we'll need people to be involved on too. So.
But I also like coming back to that, talk about it more. And so for the people who already are in 3 committees and can't join that committee, but if you start talking more about this with your friends in town and hear more about who else is concerned about this, they might join that committee. And so then more folks are joining. A Climate to Thrive has a program called Local Leads the Way, which is a monthly meeting for anybody who is engaged in or interested in community-driven climate solutions work. At any kind of scale or level or way. And then our Climate Ambassadors program, right now it's in an in-person session on MDI, and we kind of have just enough capacity to run like 1 session at a time. But the next one will be online and open to folks statewide. That'll probably start at the beginning of January would be my guess. And so they flip-flop back and forth between being in person and being online.
And before we turn to our audience questions, the final inspirational question here for folks as we work towards the end of our program.
So I have two examples here. One is some of you may know Parker Gassett. He is a climate change practitioner in Maine. I think he has presented at Blue Hill Peninsula tomorrow. He makes the point that everybody in town, the road commissioner, the planning board, the selectmen, they're already working on climate issues. It's just a matter of looking at that work through a different lens, through an added lens. John has really made that point right at the top of the hour here. The other example is my co-coordinator of Blue Hill Peninsula tomorrow, Jesse Miner. He's been eager to pivot from academia, teaching at Bates and at University of Maine in Farmington, and get more into climate science. And my advice to him was, well, you already are doing it, and you're doing it with your students, and making a career change, it may not be that important to make a career change. It's not necessarily a pivot. It's just being more intentional about what you're doing. And he now is working for the Department of Marine Resources, doing seabed mapping and contributing to climate science in that fashion. There's so many opportunities to do things in that way.
I'm just going to go back to what Joanna already said. Talk about it. Talk about it with your neighbors. Talk about it with your friends. Talk about it with your family. And let's figure out what are our commonalities and how we can rally around those commonalities to make change.
Yeah, I think you guys really said it. And to Alan's point, we have a session in the Climate Ambassadors program that's based on every job is a climate job. But like you could put quotation marks around job. Being a parent is a climate job. Like how do we talk about climate change? How do we prepare our kids or have, that seems impossible. But everything that we do, it feels heavy. But it also is this incredible opportunity to be collectively in this, which makes it a lot less heavy. And I also, again, go back to that of looking for opportunities to be led by young people. When youth come and work with the Climate to Thrive, and we ask them, what is your vision? What do you want to start? How do you want to do it? Often I see, those potentially maybe in positions of leadership in our towns, their minds going, oh, this is not possible, this is impossible, this is expensive. But if we can just kind of set that aside for a moment and hear, well, what is your vision? How would you solve this? And then how could we work together to paint a picture of what that might look like? Adjusting it, because we do know some things from having been in the work for a long time, and practicalities that unfortunately are the way they are. But what are positions or ways in which to be led by the visions of young people?
Yay. So really wonderful and inspirational, and exciting to have us all in the room, whether it's the physical room or the virtual room, because I think we all are part of this community. I think that whether MDI or Brooksville or Castine, we're all in the same boat on the same ocean here. And so to hear what's happening across our communities is really inspirational. And I think that we're seeing a head of steam get up, and we're seeing I think critical mass starting to happen in terms of our communities really working in this direction. And I think it's going to be marvelous to see how that works. We're seeing it in the museum field. Some of the things that are exciting to see, that there is no energy standard, is that the right word, for museums?
You have no Energy Star rating.
Right, yet system for museums in terms of the special needs museum, but the Wilson Museum is one of a number of museums and similar institutions that are putting all of our data into Energy Star, so that an organization that's working on that can create that. There's some really wonderful work happening in the kind of history museum field around historic preservation and what that means in terms of climate change. All right, so I'm hoping that we have some questions from our folks either in the audience or on Zoom. All right, and I'll hear your questions. I'll probably repeat them to make sure that our folks on Zoom can hear them, and then we'll have panelists volunteer to give it a stab. The core of the question is, how does our climate resilience and sustainability effort reach people living in poverty in our communities?
Yeah, that's really, really important. And I think I'll start first with the example you gave. So we've done 2 different weatherization programs on MDI at this point, and both times it's been challenging to reach exactly those folks whose homes need this the most and will probably benefit the most from the work being done. The second time, we partnered with another organization on MDI that's called Open Table MDI, and they're the food delivery service there. And so they have the existing relationship of trust. And so that we saw a much bigger participation level in that program from that community, because they do exist on MDI. I know people think that community is not there, but it is there, very much so. But this, I think, really illuminates the importance of kind of leaders and shepherds in a way within our local community that are making sure that as this process and this work of climate resilience and mitigation takes place, that it is localized, because even state policies that are coming through Efficiency Main Trust, who's designing the incentives programs that provide funding for folks of all different income levels, but there's one specifically for lower income homes to do weatherization work. They're not always, and very often, not getting it right. And so what we saw on MDI, for example, during the last weatherization program, was that even though the incentives that were available were very high, so for a low income homeowner at that time, they could get 90% of the work funded, they can't afford the 10%. So that's a huge problem. Additionally, to qualify for that higher level of assistance, which is the low income bracket, it's at the time, and that has since changed, was assessed by property value. And on MDI, that disqualified, you could have this property where you had a trailer that the wind was blowing through, but they did not qualify because of their property value for the higher level of incentives. So that has been changed. But again, like having people on the ground, seeing how this is playing out, who's getting missed, how they're getting missed, how do we build a relationship of trust with them and learn from them so that we can better design these programs to meet them to and serve them is really important. But so you still have that 10%, right, that you have to somehow do. And that's where what we're trying to do now is figure out how to set up something with our banks where there can be, basically a no interest loan available for folks, because once they weatherize their home, they're going to be saving so much on their energy bill that over time that can be paid back. But it is, just again, like you have to have the localized work and not just the state level programs, because they're going to miss people and they're not going to understand how to serve them. The other piece, though, you say, we need volunteers to do the work. There is a huge crisis, as we all know, across the country, and certainly in Maine right now when it comes to workforce. And that certainly applies to the weatherization workforce. And the state of Maine is having conversations about how to solve that. A lot of those conversations are not necessarily taking place, including the actual contractors who are doing the work, who know, what solutions are really needed. So again, like who needs to be in the room as we're trying to solve these problems so that we can really make sure we're getting the solutions right, I think is super important.
So the question is there a connection between people who are applying for LIHEAP and access to weatherization resources?
Yes. And I think, please don't quote me on this, but I think that Efficiency Maine Trust, like there's a link there between if you qualify for LIHEAP, you automatically qualify for a certain level of rebate for weatherization work. Also, I know Johnny's Community Partners does a lot of work pairing the two. So there's very strong linkages there. And I'm just not clear exactly how those are playing out on the ground at this particular moment, because things change like year to year, even around how exactly the policy is rolling out. Yeah, USDA is a really good resource for a lot of, for building solutions. And they actually have a great program for businesses that want to solarize called the REAP program. And so it's interesting because it's like USDA, you don't necessarily think about that link, but there's some pretty, substantial programming available there.
There's every good reason to do that, and I think that is one of the objectives of the Gulf of Maine Research Institute's coastal community, get these words in the correct order, coastal community, coastal flood community science, that program, that has 4 words to it. That's part of it. They're really focusing on people in the age 15 to age 30 cohort for that reason.
I will say one thing I found is that they're so busy, like the school schedule and the after school schedule, and particularly when you hit high school, but it seems to be starting younger, they're so busy. So it often requires a lot of learning around like, when could you come? Like, and how can we facilitate you coming? And stipends go a long way because they are trying to squeeze in that little bit of work, right? And usually like they've got school, extracurriculars, and then trying to figure out how they can work so they can save to go to college. And so if you can stipend them for their time, then that can fit in that bucket of how to make a little bit of money to save to go to college. And you can often get a grant for the stipends.
Internships.
We're having our first ever casting window dressers build in November. It's November 10th to 18th. If anybody has, any extra time, we'd love to have you sign up. And we've been reaching out through, I know through CARF, we've been reaching out to the people that we deliver groceries to. No Neighbor Left Behind. We've been talking to the people that we often deliver to try to get them to sign up and have their windows measured.
So you're measuring the windows to do what?
They're inserts that go in the windows, and they're like a storm window. And then they have foam around the edges so that you can easily remove them for the summer. And they really do help to save a ton of money on heating oil.
Yeah, window dressers is truly, I think, the best. And I want to say that even if like you are a seasonal resident, if you keep your home to any kind of level of warmth, so you're not draining your pipes, you're warming it to some level, put in those window inserts, because you know, if your windows are leaking, you're using a lot more energy to keep your home to that level.
And you know, if you can't pay, they are free. And what the window dressers ask, and Barbara, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that if you can't pay, can you come and work a shift and help build them? That's pretty much it, or a couple shifts. But
The question was, is there the potential for Pine Tree Power, the referendum issue, to buy the private power distribution system and make it public? Would that have an impact on climate resilience and sustainability?
I'm a 501c3, and the Climate 5 has publicly endorsed Pine Tree Power. And that was a decision we made with a lot of thought and a lot of research. We have been, so when we founded it, we were, Emera was our utility at the time. And we started off working with Emera because it was clear immediately that our utility was a make or break in this equation, that we could either get projects through or we couldn't get projects through. And we got several projects, and a couple of larger ones like the high school and the town of Tremont's installation on capped landfill through with Emera. And then when we learned that NMAX out of Calgary was looking to purchase Emera, we publicly intervened at the Public Utilities Commission so that we could start to form a relationship with Versant or with NMAX first, and learn about, you know, what their priorities were, share our priorities from doing the work on the ground and what we were seeing happen. And so we've been in a relationship with Versant, which has included meetings with the CEO and COO and their engineering team and their communications team ever since Versant came to me. And what has happened has been there has been a large and quickly increasing gap between the rhetoric from the leadership of the utility and what's actually happening on the ground. And so what we know to be true, particularly from our work with Versant, but we know this from talking with other initiatives in Central Maine Power Territory as well, is that yes, consumer-owned utility, so it's not owned by our government, it's owned by the ratepayers, will absolutely speed this transition. And that right now what is happening in Versant territory, and so in particular, you have something like the Blue Hill Peninsula where they cannot interconnect solar right now. There's a line that needs to be upgraded, and Versant right now is not upgrading it, and they're not interconnecting any solar. And there are solar installations that are on houses that are not feeding into the grid. And what we've seen from Versant is a lack of clarity and communication and rapidly increasing prices to get solar interconnected, because it's an antiquated grid, and the grid does need to change to function in the way that it needs to function to change to renewable energy sources. But they're not prioritizing that change. They're not putting the funding there. And that's because the structure of an investor-owned utility prioritizes the return to the investors. And this transition to renewable energy, as I mentioned before, requires that we upgrade the smaller distribution network, the localized distribution network. Now, it costs a lot more to attend primarily to the larger transmission lines than the smaller distribution network. So an investor-owned utility prioritizes those big transmission lines and generating power in one place and bringing it to you across those transmission lines. Because if they spend more the investors ultimately make more. They don't prioritize attending to the localized distribution network. And so we've just seen this complete roadblock of what the priorities are because of that investor-owned structure and what we need to get done to make that transition to a renewable energy powered grid. Additionally, it is not just about, I mean, certainly it is about reducing emissions. We want to reduce emissions. We have to reduce emissions. But it is the same changes that we need to make to have a more reliable and more affordable grid in the future when we have increased severe weather events. And our utilities are not preparing for that weather future, for that climate future, with how they're currently operating the grid and how they're upgrading the grid. And that is going to cause all main ratepayers to suffer. And so it's this incredible opportunity on the ballot to make this shift. And we've, had a lot of conversations with Pine Tree Power about how they've written the initiative, how will it look, making sure, like how they've run the economic analyses. They will retain the current workforce. How they will elect their board, how they will bring in the expertise to make this transition, and just have full confidence that this is absolutely the way to do this. I will say that there's very encouraging statistics out there and I think it's from Yale Center for Climate Communication, on what percentage of the population is actually in that category of like climate change is not happening. And it's much smaller than we think. And back to the work of Catherine Hayhoe, she spends a bit of time in her book looking at like, well, what is the breakdown of percentages, and that group, like, it's just not even worth it. Frankly, like, let's not focus on that. But there's this huge percentage in the middle that's concerned, but like, because they're scared of the change and they don't know about the solutions, they're not involved. So that's the place to focus. And it makes me think of my 7-year-old daughter, who is like profoundly resistant to change because it terrifies her. But if she can see how she's going to be okay in the change and how she's actually part of the story, she's not left out, then she's much more willing to make that journey with us.
For example, I know that Blue Hill Heritage Trust is in their visioning and their long range thinking, part of their work is as they strategize about land conservation is how do they address climate migration. As the director of a small nonprofit, I can tell you that trying to hire folks for jobs in Caffeine when they can't live here is a challenge, and it is interconnected, absolutely interconnected. Yeah.
Right, and when I was with Wisconsin Conservation Voters, we heard that a lot. Well, it's changing, but it's not our fault. And it's like, okay, fine, it's not our fault, but it is changing. So let's talk about what we need to do about that. We had a lot of those kinds of conversations around that. Just, okay, we're not even going to argue that with you anymore. Let's talk about what we can do to affect this. Yeah, I really liked how Johanna started A Climate to Thrive with potlucks. And, I think if we put our heads together, maybe we can figure out some way to do some childcare and bring some of those young parents together to start talking about it, because I'm really interested in it and I really want to and I'm going to do the work no matter what, but it's not me that's going to be affected as much as them and their children. And so I think, yeah, we can brainstorm on that.
also Karen's work with Dark Skies work that's happening here in Castine with Adams School students is a really good example of that our youth are engaged in this work, and some of the really most compelling and powerful Dark Skies work that's happened has been from local students, both Adams School and high school age students. So I think that they are interested and they are tapping into it, and it's exciting. Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for taking some time out of your evening, and thank you to our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much for being part of this, and the conversation will continue, so stay tuned for ongoing kind of community engagement, community conversations around this work. Thank you. Thank you.